Previously, in part 1, Olivia, a single mother, shared a deeply emotional and unexpected moment with her 23-year-old son Noah after he sought comfort on a cold night. As they lay close, the unspoken tension between them grew, leaving Olivia conflicted and unsure of how to handle the strange connection. The arrival of their neighbor Mark added another layer of complexity, sparking jealousy and deepening the emotional turmoil. Now the story continues as both mother and son retreat to their rooms, each carrying the weight of what had just transpired. Olivia glanced at the clock, its hands ticking away the final moments of the evening. The room was quiet, but her thoughts weren't. It had been a long week, and she felt the weight of it deep in her bones. She looked over at Noah, slumped on the couch, his eyes glazed with exhaustion, the kind that came from juggling too much at once. With a soft sigh, she decided it was time to talk. She walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in the muscles beneath her fingers. "You look tired," she said gently. "Do you want to talk about what's been going on the past few days?" Noah nodded, his movements slow and weary. Together, they made their way to her bedroom, where she pulled back the covers and urged him to lie down. She settled into the chair beside the bed, her gaze fixed on him as he stretched out. The room felt heavy, the air thick with unspoken words. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling her, something weighing him down. As he lay there, Olivia studied his face, the soft curve of his jaw, the way his eyelashes fluttered as he fought to keep his eyes open. She knew every line and detail, and yet tonight he seemed different, older, worn down. In that moment, she realized just how much he had grown and changed. But no matter how old he got, he was still her little boy, the one she had raised alone. The silence between them grew heavier, and she felt the need to break it. "What's been going on, Noah?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can tell me anything." Noah took a deep, shuddering breath. His gaze remained on the ceiling for a moment before he finally spoke. "I don't know, Mom. Everything's just complicated." He paused, his voice trembling. "I want us to be more than what we are, but you're my mother." Olivia's heart clenched at his words. She knew all too well the feeling of life spinning out of control. She had experienced it countless times over the years. Her hand reached out, covering his, offering what little comfort she could. "I'm here for you," she whispered. "We'll figure this out together." Noah turned to face her, and the depth of his pain was reflected in his eyes. For a moment, she was lost in them, overcome by a rush of emotions she hadn't anticipated. The love she felt for him was overwhelming, almost physical, wrapping around her like a warm embrace. Slowly, Noah's hand reached up and took hers, holding it tightly. His grip was firm, yet it trembled ever so slightly. "I know, Mom," he said, his voice cracking. I feel things when I'm around you." His words lingered in the air like a question he didn't dare speak fully, a stark reminder of the distance that had grown between them over the years. Olivia felt a tear slip down her cheek, warm and heavy. She leaned in, brushing a soft kiss against his forehead. "You're still my son," she whispered, "and I'll always love you, no matter what." The room grew quiet once more, the only sounds coming from the faint ticking of the clock and the soft rhythm of their breathing. She watched as Noah's eyes fluttered closed, his chest rising and falling in slow, steady patterns. He looked peaceful, but Olivia knew the storm wasn't over. As she sat there, her hand still holding his, she made a silent promise to herself. She would do whatever it took to help him find his way back to solid ground. The warmth of his hand in hers provided a small comfort, but it was also a reminder of the complexity of their bond. What they shared wasn't simple, it never had been. But as she sat there, she allowed herself to believe, if only for a moment, that they could get through this. In that quiet space, her thoughts drifted to the moments they had shared earlier that week. The unexpected intimacy, the confusion, the way his gaze lingered when she wasn't looking. She remembered the moment she had seen something hidden under the sheets, a detail she hadn't intended to notice but couldn't forget. Their relationship had always been close, but now it felt as though something was shifting between them, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. The night stretched on, wrapped in the quietude of unspoken truths and the warmth of a mother's love. As the house grew still around them, Olivia knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, and perhaps a new understanding of what it truly meant to be a mother. But for now, she held on to the moment, listening to the soft rise and fall of Noah's breathing, feeling the steady beat of his heart through the palm of her hand. It was a comforting reminder, no matter what lay ahead, she would be there for him, as she always had been. Through every trial, every moment of uncertainty, their bond remained intact. The minutes ticked by, and she couldn't help but reflect on her own life, the choices she had made, the sacrifices, and the paths that had led her here. She had always tried to be strong for Noah, to give him a life built on love and stability, but had she missed something along the way? Had she been so focused on being his anchor that she failed to see the signs? The weight of those questions pressed down on her as she sat by his side, her hand still resting gently in his. Her thoughts grew heavy with the years, and slowly she leaned forward, her cheek brushing against his forehead. His breathing remained steady, and she prayed that he could find peace in the warmth of their embrace. The hug between them lingered, neither of them willing to let go. It wasn't just a gesture of comfort. It was something deeper, a connection neither of them fully understood. Olivia closed her eyes and silently prayed for guidance, for the wisdom to navigate the uncharted waters of their newfound closeness. The line between mother and son had blurred, and she knew that crossing it would be a delicate balance, filled with both peril and promise. But she was willing to take the risk. For the love of her son, she would face whatever came their way with an open heart and open eyes. As the first light of dawn crept into the room, she felt a shift in the air, a gentle tug at her soul, a quiet reassurance that they would be okay. No matter what the future held, they would find their way together. With her eyes still closed and her breathing in sync with his, she whispered a soft promise into the stillness of the morning. It wasn't just a promise to herself, it was a declaration to the universe, a vow of her unyielding love for the young man who had once been a fragile baby cradled in her arms. They would face the world side by side, mother and son, each discovering who they were, together and apart. As the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the room, Olivia knew that this was the start of a new chapter in their story, a chapter filled with love, understanding, and the promise of healing. The next morning, Olivia woke to find Noah's hand still entwined with hers, his grip unchanged from the night before. She sat up slowly, careful not to disturb him, and watched him sleep. He looked peaceful, but the vulnerability and confusion still lingered beneath the surface. Her heart ached, knowing how lost he felt. It was her job to guide him through the storm, just as she had done when he was a child. Later that morning, they shared a quiet breakfast. The tension between them was palpable, but neither of them addressed it. Words, Olivia knew, wouldn't be enough to fix everything, but she hoped that her presence, her unwavering love, could be the first step toward healing. They talked about the mundane, how chilly the morning was, updates on his job, the weather forecast. But even as Noah spoke, she could see the shadows in his eyes, the weight of the thoughts he couldn't bring himself to share. After breakfast, sensing that they both needed a change of pace, Olivia suggested they take a walk. It was something they hadn't done together in years. Noah hesitated for a moment but then nodded, agreeing quietly. They put on their jackets and stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. The leaves crunched beneath their feet as they walked side by side, their breath visible in the chilly morning light. The park was quiet, the distant sound of birds and rustling trees creating a peaceful backdrop. They didn't speak much at first, but the silence felt different this time. Less suffocating, more reflective. Olivia found comfort in the simplicity of it, in the rhythm of their footsteps matching as they walked. Slowly, she felt the weight of her worries start to lift, if only for a little while. As they wandered the winding paths, Olivia glanced at Noah, hoping he could feel the same sense of calm. She knew the journey ahead would be long and difficult, but for now she allowed herself to believe that this moment of peace was the beginning of something better. Side by side, they continued forward, not knowing exactly where the path would lead, but trusting that they would find their way through it. Together, they talked about life, about love, and about the future. Amidst the beauty of the changing seasons, Olivia felt the beginnings of a shift in their relationship, a gentle unfurling of the tightly wound coil of fear and doubt that had been suffocating them both. Their conversation flowed easily, and she found herself opening up to Noah in ways she never had before. They shared stories from their past, secrets that had been buried too long, and dreams that had been set aside in the name of survival. With each step they took, she felt their bond strengthening. The love that had always been there was growing into something deeper, something profound. As they strolled hand in hand through the park, the silence between them became comfortable, and the weight of the previous night began to lift. Laughter returned, soft at first, then full and genuine. The sound echoed through the trees like a melody they had forgotten. And in that moment, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Olivia knew they had turned a corner. The path ahead was still uncertain, but they would face it together. She was his mother, and he was her son, and that love was unshakable. A chilly breeze carried the scent of pine and the distant sounds of children playing. Olivia felt a newfound lightness in her step. She glanced over at Noah and saw his eyes shining, bright with the promise of a new day. She knew then that they had taken the first step toward healing. They talked about his fears, his hopes, and his dreams. Olivia listened with her whole heart, nodding in understanding, offering words of encouragement when she could. With each word spoken, she saw the lines of tension easing from his face. The burden of his secret seemed to lift, leaving him visibly lighter. By the time they returned home, the sun was high in the sky, and somehow the house felt different, lighter, as if the energy inside had shifted. They sat together on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the world pass by. It was such a simple moment, but it carried a profound sense of peace, the kind they hadn't felt in a long time. Noah turned to her, his gaze clear and steady. "Mom," he said, his voice soft, "thank you." Olivia reached over, taking his hand and giving it a gentle squeeze. "For what?" "For everything," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "For never giving up on me." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she smiled through it, leaning her head against his shoulder. They sat together in the warmth of the sun, basking in the glow of their love and the knowledge that they could overcome anything together. The rest of the day passed in a blur of small, meaningful moments, as if the universe itself knew they needed to keep moving forward. They tackled the laundry pile, cooked a meal together, and even watched a movie, something they hadn't done in ages. Through it all, the unspoken understanding between them remained, a quiet but powerful force binding them closer. As the evening drew near, and the golden light of the setting sun bathed the living room walls, Olivia felt a sense of accomplishment, of growth. They had faced the storm, and they had come out stronger. She knew the night would bring more challenges, more questions, but she didn't feel afraid. They had each other, and that was enough. As they sat together in the living room, Noah's hand resting gently in hers, she realized that this moment was only the beginning. The story of Olivia and Noah was one of love, growth, and understanding, a testament to the complexity of family ties. No matter how tangled life became, the threads of family and love could always be woven back together. Olivia squeezed Noah's hand and smiled, feeling the quiet strength of the bond they shared. "We'll figure it out," she whispered, more to herself than to him, and she believed it. If you've enjoyed this story, continue to support us by subscribing and watching more videos. I never imagined I'd be telling this story, but life often takes you to places you don't expect. My name is Olivia, and I'm 46 years old. I've been a single mother for many years, raising my son Noah on my own. Noah's 23 now, and we've always had a close relationship, just the two of us navigating life's challenges together. One evening, something happened that I wasn't prepared for. Noah had been burning the candle at both ends, working long shifts at his job while also preparing for his final exams. When he walked through the front door of our small apartment, I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He barely managed to kick off his shoes before collapsing onto the couch. "I'm wiped out, Mom," he mumbled. "I feel like I could sleep for a week." "You've been working too hard," I said gently, brushing a strand of hair off his forehead. "Why don't you lie down for a bit in my room? The living room is too cold tonight." He nodded and followed me into my bedroom, dragging his feet like every step was a battle. I tucked him in under the warm quilt that had always been my comfort during chilly nights. At first, everything felt normal, a mother helping her son get some much-needed rest. But as I lay down next to him to keep him company, something shifted in the air. Noah turned toward me under the blanket, moving closer as if searching for warmth. I didn't think much of it at first. It was instinctive, a habit from when he was younger. But then, his arm wrapped around me gently, pulling me closer. My breath hitched, and I hesitated for a moment before settling back into the pillow. He probably just needed comfort after such a draining day, I told myself. I could feel his body warmth against mine and the steady rhythm of his breathing. The room was so silent that I could hear my own heartbeat growing louder. I stayed still, not wanting to wake him or make him feel uncomfortable. But as the minutes passed, I became acutely aware of how close we were. The warmth between us wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, something I couldn't easily explain. Noah shifted again, this time tightening his grip slightly. My body tensed, unsure of what to do. My mind was at war with itself, one part urging me to move away, while another part stayed frozen, unsure if I even wanted to. I told myself that this was just a brief, awkward moment that would pass, but when his hand brushed against my arm, tracing small, gentle circles on my skin, I felt a shiver run through me. It was such a small gesture, yet it felt electric. My heart raced, and I struggled to keep my breathing steady. I didn't want Noah to notice how much this moment was affecting me. I reminded myself again that he was my son, and this was nothing more than a moment of comfort. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. The weight of his arm on me, the warmth of his body pressed so close, and the softness of his breath against my neck, it was all too much. My thoughts spiraled, filled with questions I didn't want to face. Why did this feel different? Why couldn't I ignore the way his touch sent waves of emotion through me? And then, Noah lifted his head slightly and looked at me. His eyes held a softness I hadn't seen before, a mixture of vulnerability and something deeper, something that made my breath catch. His gaze lingered on mine as if he were searching for reassurance or permission. I tried to smile, hoping it would break the tension, but it only seemed to deepen it. He rested his hand on my arm, his touch warm and steady. His fingers moved slowly, absent-mindedly, as if he didn't realize what he was doing. But I felt every movement, every brush of his fingertips, like a spark igniting something inside me that I couldn't ignore. I wanted to speak, to say something that would ease the intensity between us, but the words wouldn't come. The air in the room felt heavier, like we were both trapped in a moment we didn't know how to escape. "Mom," Noah whispered, his voice barely audible. "Are you okay?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm fine," I whispered back, though my heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. His gaze stayed locked on mine for a moment longer, before he rested his head on my shoulder again. I could feel his breath against my collarbone, warm and steady. The warmth of his body pressed against mine only grew, and the tension between us refused to fade. I lay there, wide awake, while Noah's breathing slowly returned to the steady rhythm of sleep. My mind was racing, torn between logic and the confusing emotions swirling inside me. I told myself over and over that this was just an innocent moment, that it didn't mean anything, but the longer I lay there, the harder it became to convince myself. When the first rays of sunlight crept through the window, I carefully slipped out of bed, making sure not to wake him. My feet felt heavy as I made my way to the kitchen, my mind still clouded with confusion. I stood by the sink, staring out at the city streets below, trying to make sense of what had happened. The warmth of Noah's touch still lingered on my skin, and I couldn't shake the memory of the way his gaze had held mine. I wanted to believe that things would go back to normal once he woke up, that this was just a passing moment brought on by exhaustion and stress. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something between us had shifted, and I wasn't sure if things could ever go back to the way they were before. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, hoping that time would provide the clarity I desperately needed. But as the morning light continued to fill the apartment, I realized that the questions in my heart weren't going away anytime soon. I felt a mixture of confusion and warmth, an unexpected combination that held me still. Noah didn't seem to notice my internal struggle. He just stayed beside me, his hand moving softly along my arm, comforting, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. His breathing remained calm, his eyes closing again, and for a moment I wondered if he was falling asleep. But then his hand shifted, moving slowly upward, brushing lightly against my skin. A chill ran through me, and that's when he opened his eyes, looking directly into mine. There was something unspoken in his gaze, a question lingering there, as if he were silently asking if this was okay, if I felt the same strange pull that he did. My breath hitched, and I barely managed to whisper his name. Noah, the word escaping my lips like a fragile plea. I wanted to stop this, to pull away and create distance between us, but somehow I couldn't move. The tension binding us together was too strong, like the calm before a storm, quietly building in the silence. Neither of us spoke, but the air between us felt heavy, filled with words we couldn't say. Then, almost naturally, as if he were moving on instinct, he leaned in closer. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing with fragmented thoughts, but I couldn't bring myself to pull back. I felt torn, caught between my role as his mother and the strange feelings that had surfaced so unexpectedly. As he inched closer, I felt my breath catch, and every logical thought I had faded away, leaving only that moment between us. Noah's hand rested gently on my shoulder now, his fingers lingering as if he too was hesitating. The world around us seemed distant, like a blur at the edges of my vision. All I could focus on was the warmth of his presence and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, a sound I could almost hear. I closed my eyes briefly, trying to calm myself, silently urging my body to back away, to break the closeness that felt so confusing and overwhelming. But before I could act, I felt his hand move again, this time gently brushing a loose strand of hair away from my face. It was such a simple, caring gesture, but it made my heart ache in ways I couldn't understand. I opened my eyes, and there he was, so close that I could see every small detail. His face, just inches away, revealed tiny freckles I'd never noticed before. The gentle curve of his lips, the way his eyes searched mine, all of it made my breath catch again. There was a vulnerability in his gaze that mirrored my own. I could see that he was just as lost in this moment as I was. We stayed like that, suspended in the quiet, as if time itself had stopped. My mind spun in a whirlwind of questions and doubts, struggling to process the emotions flooding through me, but my body remained still, unable to break free from the invisible force pulling me toward him. I looked at him, the boy I had raised, the son I had known for 23 years, and yet in this moment, he felt like someone entirely new to me. Just when I thought we'd stay frozen in that charged silence forever, Noah pulled back slightly, breaking the trance. He looked away, almost embarrassed, and let out a shaky laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. His sudden movement jolted me back to reality, making me realize just how close we had been. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rush of emotions swirling inside me. I hoped he hadn't noticed how much I was struggling. "Sorry, Mom," he said softly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I didn't mean to make things weird." He avoided my gaze, his eyes focused on the floor. I could see a faint blush creeping across his cheeks, the color betraying his own inner turmoil. He was just as confused as I was, and it was written all over his face. I wanted to say something to comfort him, to tell him that everything was okay, that we could brush this off and move on like nothing had happened. But the words got stuck in my throat. For the first time in a long while, I felt awkward around my own son. After a moment of hesitation, I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. I forced a small smile, hoping it would ease the tension hanging between us. "It's okay," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to reassure him or myself. His shoulders relaxed slightly under my touch, but the awkwardness lingered, like an invisible weight pressing down on both of us. Neither of us knew what to say next, and for a moment we just sat there, caught in the confusion of what had just happened. The room was quiet again, but inside me, a storm of emotions still raged. I silently prayed that when the morning came, we'd both find the clarity we desperately needed. "It's all right, Noah," I said, my voice soft and steady. "It's just, well, it's been the two of us for so long. We're probably both feeling a little lost." He nodded, and I saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. For a moment, the tension between us seemed to ease, the weight of the previous moment starting to fade. But just as I allowed myself to breathe again, the doorbell rang. The sudden noise jolted us both, snapping us back to reality and breaking whatever unspoken connection had formed between us. I quickly stood up, my heart still racing, and made my way to the door. I was grateful for the interruption, for the brief reprieve from the swirling emotions I wasn't ready to confront.